And joining us now as well for more analysis is Brendon O'Connor, Professor of U.S. Politics at the United States Studies Center at the University of Sydney. Professor, your thoughts first on Trump's second primary win. Was the writing on the wall, or were there any surprises this time?
Well, the polls predicted that Donald Trump was going to win in Iowa and in New Hampshire, so they've been reasonably accurate. But none of the polls suggested that Nikki Haley would get into the 40s. She's got around 45% of the vote. That's, I think, exceeding expectations and certainly exceeding where people would have thought she was at a month ago. So you could argue there's some momentum with her campaign. I think it is too early to say it's inevitable Trump is going to win. It looks likely. But it's worth remembering that 4 years ago, in a very competitive Democrat primary in New Hampshire, Joe Biden got 8% of the vote, and he was the fifth candidate. So the primary process can be one of twists and turns. She's got the advantage of going to her home state, South Carolina, on the 24th of February, where she will be hoping for an upset. Trump is well ahead in the polls there, but I think she's alive as a candidate, and she's alive as a candidate particularly because these court cases that Trump is involved in, we know there are many of them, but there are a couple of prominent ones that will start being heard, I think, in March sometime. This may, to some extent, turn a few voters, not a huge number, but a few voters in the Republican primaries off Donald Trump if it seems like he is going to be convicted of a federal offense.
Now, Professor, let's look at the voters in New Hampshire. It's a more moderate and independent primary compared to Iowa. What matters most to voters here that gave Trump the win?
Well, I think why Nikki Haley did a lot better than her sort of, mid-20s performance in Iowa is that independents could vote. And so when you register to vote in the United States, not compulsory to register, you either register as a Democrat or a Republican or as an independent. In most states, only those who register for a particular party can get to vote in primaries, but not in New Hampshire. It prides itself on being a quirky, very independent state, and so independent voters get to vote. Now, given the Democrat primaries are not very competitive, it's a foregone conclusion Biden will, in fact, be the Democrats' candidate. A Democrat could change their electoral enrollment from being a Democrat-enrolled person to being an independent and cause some trouble or just cast some vote against Donald Trump and for Nikki Haley in this primary. So it doesn't tell us, what the feeling entirely is with Republican voters because it's complicated by these registered independents being able to vote in New Hampshire.
And so some reports, Professor, say that these independents came out in droves today. And so understandably, some say they're disappointed by the Trump victory. In your opinion, how crucial will this segment be in the run-up to November?
Well, it depends on the state. Some states independents get to vote, some states they don't. There's a very complicated process. I mean, in some ways, when it's not so much at stake, this is kind of one of the things I enjoy about American politics, these intricacies of the primary and caucuses process, but so much is on the line in this election. Donald Trump is someone who incited violence on January 6, 2021, someone who lied very dramatically about Biden's clear victory with no evidence that, Donald Trump had the election stolen from him. So the impact of this on democracy in the United States, on democracy in general, and Trump's total disregard, we've got to say, for the rule of law, make this a very important election and make Donald Trump's victories, I think, for many of us who are concerned about liberal democracy, very concerning. So this is a very significant election that we're facing this year in the United States, and Trump has some chance of being re-elected as president.
And Professor, Nikki Haley just now saying that Trump, were he to be the GOP candidate, plays right into the hands of the Democrats. She's basically saying Biden will defeat him. What do you make of that?
Well, that's the evidence, isn't it? I mean, 2020, Joe Biden did reasonably, sort of handsomely defeat Donald Trump. Now things are looking a bit tighter in the polls, but it's very uncommon in American politics that a loser gets to re-fight against a candidate that's already beaten them. The last time this occurred was with Eisenhower in Stevenson in 1956. So usually in most democratic systems, once you lose, you're kind of gone. Richard Nixon came back after his defeat in 1960 and was elected in 1968, but against a different candidate, a much weaker Herbert Humphrey rather than a John F. Kennedy. So Trump, has an enormous ego. His belief in himself, his lies about the election being stolen from him have been all part of his attempt to have a comeback. But we only have one US president who was defeated in an election after being president and came back. That was in the 19th century, Grover Cleveland. So, the odds are against Trump. But with Trump, form, history, many predictions of people like myself, we've got to be cautious about them because he's rewritten many of the sort of rule books. But there is, this sense that Biden has certain strengths in the key states that Trump would need to win to beat him in this election in November this year.
Professor, one last quick question. You mentioned Biden has his strengths, but he's also being challenged by several people in his own party who think he's a weak candidate. Why is this?
Well, there's always tends to be a few minor candidates who run against even sitting presidents. I wouldn't see these as being, serious contenders. I don't think Biden has much to worry about from these people in his own party challenging him in the primaries. They're not going to, I think, garner a huge number of votes. I think the bigger issue is his popularity in general in the United States is not particularly strong. I mean, Biden is in a weak position in terms of historical trends, in terms of his approval rating, and a lot of people feel that he hasn't done enough to curb inflation. Interest rates in the United States are quite high. And so this is going to be a real vulnerability for Biden come November, that we're going to have, in fact, two pretty unpopular candidates, probably, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, neither of them with enormous enthusiasm from their own parties. Certainly a lot of people who are strongly against both of them. So this, for some people, is going to be a pretty sort of disappointing face-off between two people, very elderly, not in their best form in many regards, that are going to be the leader of one of the most powerful countries in the world.
All right, Professor, thank you very much for your insights. That was Professor Brendon O'Connor at the United States Studies Center at the University of Sydney.